Blake Avenue.
And
Blake
it
and
goes
what?
from
Up
where?
to-
From, what is that, Coolidge? How far up does it go?
Did everyone get a copy of the large map?
I just
We
got
saw
one.
the larger map.
It includes Alessandro, it goes all the way.
So it's really, the boundary is really
No,
irregular, so
actually further to Bentview.
They didn't answer your question if the city still.
so the shape is pretty irregular.
Let's get again.
So, a few other
Answer your question.
questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to make my way sort of left to right, so nothing over here in the very front.
If you look at the map, it's about 2 blocks north of Coolidge.
Okay,
The
very good.
green one at the very bottom is North Place in the city yard, with the little blue L shape is the Bentley property. So you're going down to Doris Place, or down Doris Place Avenue, and then you got your Bentley cut in at the bottom, and then all the way up to 2 blocks north of Coolidge. Against the river.
Okay.
My question is what, and one of our big concerns is infrastructure. How does that fit into zoning and development? Because that would be one of my biggest blocks, because our streets are only 1-car wide.
Yeah. That's been an issue that I've been hearing a lot about, and actually that dovetails into the parking thing that I wanted to talk about. So infrastructure improvements have to be tied to major development. So if you're coming in and building a massive new project, you're going to be required to make improvements that are proportional to your project. So if there aren't, for instance, sewer lines and water lines to support your massive new residential, then as a developer, you're going to have to pay for those types of improvements. Street widening is a more difficult conversation to have because you can't widen the street on top of people's property. So we are, in that sense, hamstrung with narrow streets, which are either a neighborhood asset or a challenge, depending on the point of view and what the conversation is. I want to throw out the parking topic and then make my way across for the rest of the questions. The other issue that we want to address is the way that parking is treated. So right now, if you're doing a change of use in an existing building, so we have a lot of 1- and 2-story boat trust, warehouse type buildings, many of which are empty, and a lot of folks have shown interest in wanting to reuse, either as lofts or as some kind of office space. People keep saying creative office, and I'd love to really understand how that's different from office. We're all creative people. But for office space, or even for places like cafes, and normally when you do that sort of thing, the city makes you find parking for your new use. And it's probably going to be more parking spaces, and there's probably not room for it on your lot. So the difficulty is that makes it hard to reuse those buildings, which makes them stay empty, or makes them stay a tow yard, or a place where cars are painted, or those types of uses. So what we're trying to look at is, could some of that new parking be offset by bicycle parking if it's a river-oriented use and it's catered toward bicycle uses? So we just want to have a conversation with the community. I think there are pros and cons to that sort of thing, but I'm hoping to find some kind of consensus, or at least some polar opposites, but a lot of input from the community about that, because it really could facilitate reuse of a lot of those blocks along the river. But it also could provide challenges if, in fact, people aren't riding their bikes to those, and we've got all these narrow streets with cars. So that's a subject we'll want to get into on too. So, come back.
With I think we got to talk about the negative impacts as well. If all this commercial use is going to be brought to this neighborhood, it's going to bring a lot of tourism. Let's say right here on Los Feliz on Riverside Drive, there's apartments right there. There are some 30 apartments. Cost like $2,000. The people here are low-income families. They won't be able to afford the new development that will come here. It's going to be like $2,000. We can't afford it. I think we should talk about gentrification. I think we should talk about important things like this, because a lot of people don't know what this means.
So I think that's what we're trying to talk about. So the topic at hand is commercial uses already are allowed. They're allowed now, and there's this requirement that says, well, you can't do 100% commercial. Can you do 99% commercial? It doesn't really say. So that's the thing that we need to, as a community, decide. What do we really think about that? Is this restriction artificial, and let's just have commercial uses and we'll get some amenities in the neighborhood that we want to see? Or, hold on, we really should have some sort of manufacturing requirement because this is industrial land and we want to try to preserve a certain type of neighborhood environment. So that is why we're here today. So thank you for reinforcing that. Any other questions?
Yes?
Yes, hi.
Okay. Are there specific areas
areas going to be for mixed-use housing? Because I understand that there are some buildings that have gone up more than 2 stories high.
Oh.
And could you also explain mixed use as opposed to affordable housing?
Well, okay, so mixed-use housing right now is allowed in all of the CM zones. So I said earlier that the CM zone allows almost everything. So you can build housing on top, retail on bottom, you can build live-work units, you can do any sort of mixed use. And in fact, in some places, you would have to, because you're not allowed to do 100% residential. You can't do 100% residential, you better find some kind of shop or some kind of something to go on your ground floor. So that's required. Now, affordable housing is a different subject. A lot of developers will build projects that are 100% affordable, and a lot of those are projects that are grant funded or there's some kind of subsidy. And with most affordable projects, they're using something called the density bonus ordinance, which is something that applies citywide, which essentially says, if as a developer you're going to include affordable housing at certain percentages, and by the way, when I say affordable housing, I mean housing that is specifically targeted towards specific household incomes at sort of regional median levels. So this is all the housing department kind of verifies, and there's percentages of incomes, all the sort of like metrics around that. So it's not just like we think it's affordable. There's definitions for that. So if you're building projects with affordable housing, you usually get to go an extra floor higher. You usually get some relief from some of the building setback requirements, and that's just something that the state has required, that the city has integrated into its density bonus ordinance. So those projects could be mixed use, and most likely in this environment they would be because of the requirements. In some cases it's just an affordable housing project, and those are things that are allowed today. So and we know that because they're already being built.
Can I just say the density bonus is a statewide thing?
Right. So there was state bill, SB 1818, and that was a piece of state legislation that said, hey cities, we have an affordable housing crisis, so you are going to provide programs that allow buildings to be bigger if they provide affordable housing, figure it out, or just use this bill. So the city then adopted its own LAMC 1222A25 in the zoning code, the density bonus ordinance, that took most of the provisions of the state bill. We tweaked them some for our own environment, but it captures everything the state made us do. So it's a state requirement that the city implements. And every other city in California is doing it, or they're not getting federal and state funds from us to implement it in the front.
So on the commercial to residential
What the hell?
ratio question about these properties, I think it's really important for everyone to understand that this CM zone in the Q condition has not traditionally been used for housing. It's been traditionally been used for manufacturing in our area. So I would say that it's very valuable to have some commercial uses there. If we look at the census data from Frogtown, Elysian Valley for the last 10, 15 years, we see a reduction in our median income in this area, which would correspond with a slow reduction in industrial jobs, in fact, and other factors nationally and otherwise. So the opportunity of having some business here, whoever is the people who use that, some of those businesses could be things that fulfill community needs that we don't have fulfilled now, like a little market that people really desire to have. Certainly some of those other uses may bring people from outside the neighborhood, thereby also allowing people within the neighborhood to establish small businesses. So I think, for me, one of the concerns is to set aside some of that for commercial uses that can continue to benefit the local community in services and as well in the potential of creating small businesses. And I say small because I think it's also very important that we try to scale this in such a way that this is a very molecular community, meaning there are small owners and therefore we know one another. For good and bad, we fight it out, we work it out. So it has to do with the scale in which we can accomplish.
So I see all the hands. So philosophically, that's what the Q condition tried to do by saying no 100% commercial. The downside is that's super ambiguous. So we need to write a better metric. So one approach would be, forget it. Let's just allow people to do commercial. However, that's one option. Another option would be to have a different percentage and just be clear. You can I'm just going to pick a random number, up to 75% of your building area can be commercial, the rest has to be manufacturing. That's one possibility, and at least those are clear, as opposed to just no 100%. Another option would be to have just overall size limits on a commercial development. So retail establishments won't be bigger than, again, pick a random number, 2,000 square feet, or whatever the community feels is the size of a neighborhood market that would really be a neighborhood market versus a mega store, regional, people are coming from all around to come, so you just sort of pick a number for that type of thing. That's the conversation that we need to have. So, and by the way, we're gonna do about 5 or 10 more minutes of this discussion, then I'm just gonna invite people to get up. We've got these boards, we've got your handout sheets of all these city staff here. So hang on, I'm gonna make my way around the room. I've got my eye on you. I promise.
Patient. Okay, we're trying to be patient.
It's Saturday morning. So we're gonna do this discussion for a little bit while longer, and then we're just gonna get up, interact with the boards. There are places to write notes. We want your comments on these input sheets. This is the beginning of the conversation. So, having been said, I'm gonna go now right to left with some questions and comments, and then we're gonna wrap up the talking head piece of this morning presentation. In the back.
Yeah. I noticed unless the developers actually care about the community and they actually care about having affordable retail and affordable housing, this whole development is not going to do us any favors. Unless they actually want the community to remain a community and they want people with the same tax brackets to be able to shop at the retail. Because in the last 10 years, most of the businesses I've seen open in the area are catering to people that don't even live in the area.
Okay.
And I've been noticing that in the condos that they build in a bunch of different perspectives.
Okay. Both hands. Hi.
All right, yeah, because you ignored me 3 times. What I was gonna say is, when you say you couldn't define affordable, you didn't say affordable who? It should be reworded and say low income. Because Mitchell Farrell in a newspaper in Los Feliz said that the Elysian Valley neighborhood earning for yearly is $34,000. $34,000 a year. And if the rent is going to be $2,000, they're going to be displaced no matter what.
Yeah, so affordable housing is defined across several different income categories. This is where it gets kind of boring for a lot of people. So there's low income, there's moderate income, that's a protected class. There's low income, there's very low income, and there's actually extra low income.
Extra low income.
So those are all different categories that are addressed within this density bonus world. So if you provide certain percentages of moderate, your percentages of low or very low are going to be different. The percentages are geared on a regional median income, and that's the way that affordable housing is addressed throughout the LA County area. So it's all very defined. It's not sort of, we think it's affordable. We could sit down and look at the ordinance if you're really into looking at that kind of thing. But that's
Just to clarify, I think the 2014 numbers for the area median income were about 68,000.
Okay.
That was the HUD number there.
You need to raise your hand first.
Okay.
No, that's area median income for the whole city, region, not the city.
Oh, okay.
So you're talking about affordable housing. Affordable, who says affordability? And also this affordable housing is going to be affordable for the low income and very low income residents of the Elysian Valley?
So let's just, I feel like we're getting hung up on a topic that's not as complex as it needs to be. So
There are many questions more.
here's the deal. People can build housing in Elysian Valley. In the residential area, you can build just housing. In the CM area, the blue on the map, you can build a lot more housing. You can build 1 unit for 1,200 square feet of lot.
We don't want that.
And you can just build it however you want. You can build
We don't want it.
you can build super fancy condos. If you think there's a market for that, you can build the most affordable housing in the entire region. That's what's allowed because that's the way the economy works.
That's only for the real estate agents.
So
Yeah.
that's just reality. So that's the type of housing that you can build. As part of that, the city has this density bonus program to try to incentivize you to build affordable housing. And so we're seeing a lot of people are using that. There are at least 2 density bonus projects in the area that I know of. And that is what is allowed. So as we're having this conversation about housing, what type of housing is allowed in this blue area? How much should there be? Does it have to be mixed use? Could it be 100% residential? We also have the ability to say, should it all be affordable? Do we wanna see only good work in affordable housing? Do we wanna see only affordable housing? Do we wanna see, and then there are pros and cons to that. We had a conversation at one of the MOS meetings a few weeks ago, where it was talked about how affordable housing projects are bigger than normal because of the density bonus ordinance. So that means instead of a 2-story building, you've now got a 3-story building. And that really kind of bumped everybody out. Everyone said we don't wanna see 3-story buildings, we have a really unique character here. Well, then you're probably not gonna see affordable housing. This is the reality in which we live. So that's about all I'm gonna say about affordable housing from up front, but come on and talk to me one-on-one if you'd like. Any other questions?
Yes,
Yes, hi, and then,
okay. Does everyone know that for Elysian Valley, there will be planned future hotels and upscale restaurants? That is the future plan. So do your research. And then on mixed use, mixed use is business on the bottom and maybe 4 or 5 stories apartments. So that runs $1,300 a month and up, not including utilities. Okay, that's why I asked him about the 2 stories that have already gone up. And remember, that includes density, and we're not speaking to density. Now, this is not just Elysian Valley, it's the city. Okay, and do you know, the Olympics is coming, or we think it's coming, if we get the bid for 2023. It will be announced Monday, public. Okay, LA wants the bid. Now take into consideration these hotels that will be built in Elysian Valley and the high-scale restaurant. That's for Dodger Stadium at present. We're not talking about what the river projects will be. So do your research so you will know.
okay, so in the back.
So,
Oh, me? Oh, sorry. So, I'm gonna be really quick to repeating the information, but parking is a biggie. When someone parks at the edge of your parking entrance, and the parking driveways are so narrow, you try to back out and there's a car on the other side, it's almost impossible to get out now. So we already have that issue here. Second of all, I'm getting really confused now because I'm thinking, wow, all these, developments are coming. Maybe we should consider businesses still being here. Really, when we think about the density that we're having there, the loss of jobs, what our schools are going to be impacted with, our streets, it's like, it's a balance that we're looking at now. Which way do we go? And also, is there any of those low-income developments here in our community now?
I think the gentleman behind you built one of them. Is that, am I?
Not the point of danger, but is there any that we know of?
The project in Alessandro is 100% affordable, is that correct?
it's 20% affordable.
It's 20% affordable, so that's a density bonus project, so that
Is that to purchase or to rent?
It's gonna be rental.
And what will the rents be?
Start at $500
For a,
for a studio, $800 for a 3-bedroom.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
how many units are you?
Okay, so, gentlemen with sunglasses and in the front, we're gonna wrap this
In
up.
the area that I talked about, the commercial and just in general, has there ever been an environmental study and the impact on the public and safety that the buildings would bring in? If you're gonna bring more people in, there's gonna be more of the infrastructure that will be used. The river is very sensitive in wildlife. Is it also something that has been studied? Because I hear all this stuff, but I don't hear any studies that have been done to actually see the impact that it'll have, because it will affect the health and safety, which is a key factor in any type of planning
That's a really good
when
question.
you are here, because they have fire issues there, they're short roads,
Yeah.
they're adding more people, more parking, and this will cause a major problem for the community.
Yeah, and this is a really isolated place in terms of getting in and out. So let me explain a little bit how environmental studies work in the city. When the community plan was done back in the late 90s and adopted in the early 2000s, let me back up even farther. In the state of California, we have the California Environmental Quality Act, which says, hey, cities, towns, counties, whenever you do anything discretionary, which means that you have to think about it, you need to do some sort of environmental study. So at that time, when we did the community plan for Silver Lake, Echo Park, Elysian Valley, a mitigated negative declaration. So we studied all of the new zoning that was thought of, so rezones on Sunset Boulevard, what's happening over on Hoover, what's happening with these CM lots along the river, and all these environmental factors were studied. What are the impacts going to be to biological resources? What are the impacts going to be to public resources like police, fire, libraries, we know libraries. What are the impacts going to be to things like air quality, traffic? There's this whole laundry list of things that the city has to look at. And at that time, we did what's called a mitigated negative declaration, which said there's not going to be an environmental impact for what we're doing with this plan. And the plan didn't do a whole lot of upzoning because we can mitigate it with all of these mitigation measures. I can't really recite what those are at this time. So that's just sort of how did we redo the zoning. Now, whenever new development projects come along that are, we'll just call them fairly large, so you've got more than 50 residential units, you've got more than 50,000 square feet of commercial floor area, if you're asking for a zone change or a variance, or again, anything that you kind of have to think about because it's not already just planned for, then you're going to have to do another environmental study. So for instance, there's an application right now to build small lot housing on the Bimbo site. That way. So they're doing their own environmental study right now. So the stakeholders, this document will be public. At some point there'll be a draft, it'll be released to the public, it'll be available for comment. So that's the sort of thing that I'm concerned about biological resources on the river. You probably want to read that section and see if it makes any sense to you and make comments.
But I also meant from the city standpoint, because when you look at all the planning and revitalization from Hollywood to Silver Lake to Echo Park, if you look at the infrastructure that's breaking down, just in Echo Park alone, because we stated that there was stress on the pipe from the developments that were there.
Yep.
Now, from your guys' standpoint, are you guys implementing it as you're planning along the way? And that's a key factor, because you can have the public be responsible for it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to spend the money on this project.
That is a very difficult question to answer. So the city actually just released its annual report on growth and infrastructure. So we talked a little bit about the Silver Lake community, the Silver Lake Echo Park Elysian Valley community plan. That's part of a larger general plan with this thing called the framework element, which is kind of like the master plan for all of the city. What's the strategy for growth? By the way, if anyone asks, the strategy for growth is to put growth next to transit centers and preserve residential neighborhoods. That's the basic idea in LA. And that framework element requires that we do this annual growth and infrastructure report to see if our infrastructure is keeping pace with the type of growth that we forecasted in that framework element. So that report gets released every year. It says, here's what growth is, and here's the input that we're getting from all the other departments about infrastructure. And everything's fine on the report, and then you see, oh, there was a water main break on Sunset Boulevard, and everything flooded, and so the infrastructure conversation is really difficult to have, but that's the manner in which it's addressed in LA. We have this framework element that forecasts how growth works regionally in the city, and how the city has to monitor its infrastructure accordingly. Do we have the money to spend on those infrastructure improvements that are needed? That's a much larger question.
But I think too that if you guys would add it into the fact, when you're saying that, you're basically saying you're gonna plan these events. And if we don't have the money, don't expect for the infrastructure to be fixed. And
So-
that's putting the health and safety of the public, of the residents of the Elysian Valley at stake.
So that's where I want to be clear though. So for a large development to come in, like the Bimbo site, they then have to make infrastructure improvements themselves. So if their environmental study says you don't actually have the appropriate level of water sewer service, you're going to put so many new residential units in here that there's not adequate police and fire protection based on what the ratio is that we have right now, then that project either has to mitigate those potential impacts, or has to do an EIR that says we can't possibly mitigate it, and then the city has to approve it with some overriding considerations.
No, I mean, that's part of what I'm
that's the
saying,
way
is
that
that
works.
that process has failed throughout those communities in which they weren't for, and which they didn't comply, and they didn't do all these things. So it's putting pressure, and I think when you guys are building these zonings for these certain areas, especially commercial, because commercial means they can be using chemicals, why would they even allow that along the river?
Yeah.
I know they're regulated, but the question is, when you look at it, I don't think that there's a very good foundation when you're planning it, and at the same time, when you see these things affected, I don't see how anybody could plan anything that doesn't have an environmental impact.
So I think the only thing that I want to clarify at this point, again, because it's a really challenging topic that you're bringing up, is that